Imagine walking through a city street and suddenly being swept off your feet not by water, not by fire, but by a wave of molasses. It might sound like the punchline of a joke, but on January 15th, 1919, that's exactly what happened in Boston, Massachusetts. The Great Molasses Flood, also known as the Boston Molasses Disaster, remains one of the most bizarre and tragic industrial accidents in American history. The disaster occurred in the north end of Boston, a historically Italian-American neighborhood crowded with families, dock workers, and street vendors. Among the mix of homes and businesses stood a massive steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, owned by the Purity Distilling Company. This tank held over 2.3 million gallons of molasses, used in producing industrial alcohol. At the time, molasses wasn't just for sweetening cookies, it was used to make ethanol, a key ingredient in munitions production, especially important during World War I, as the war ended in late 1918. Demand remained high, and so did the company's urgency to move and store the sticky substance. In the days leading up to the disaster, Boston was experiencing unseasonably warm temperatures. The tank had just been filled a few days prior with a fresh shipment of warm molasses from the Caribbean, layered on top of colder molasses already inside. This temperature difference would prove deadly. Around 12:30 p.m. on January 15th, the unthinkable happened. The steel tank burst open with a sound that witnesses described as thunder or a machine gun. What followed was pure chaos. A 25-foot-high wave of molasses came roaring out into the streets at 35 miles per hour. The force of the wave flattened buildings, knocked over freight cars, and swept people and horses off their feet. Those caught in the flood were trapped in a sticky, suffocating mess that made escape nearly impossible. It was like drowning in glue. Fireman George Leahy was among the first responders trapped inside a collapsed firehouse. He was pinned under debris, molasses oozing around him. Despite heroic efforts, he would not survive. His death was one of 21 caused by the flood. Rescue efforts were hampered by the very substance they were trying to wade through. Molasses stuck to everything: clothing, skin, equipment. Police, firefighters, and volunteers used axes and boats to reach the injured, often sinking into the goo up to their waists. It wasn't just people who perished. Horses and dogs suffocated in the syrup, and countless property and infrastructure damages followed. Nearly 150 people were injured, and multiple buildings were destroyed. The cleanup was just as grueling. For weeks, workers used salt water, sand, and even fire hoses to try to dilute and move the molasses. The smell of sugar lingered in the air for months. Some say you could still smell it on hot days years later. The massive storage tank, it turns out, had been poorly constructed and improperly tested. Rivets were popping, seams were leaking. Neighbors had reported hearing ominous groans from the structure before the disaster. One particularly damning fact: employees had reportedly painted the tank brown to hide the molasses that leaked constantly from its seams. Instead of addressing the structural weaknesses, the company had merely tried to cover them up literally. An investigation revealed that the steel used was too thin and brittle. The design had not been approved by an engineer. In essence, the tank was a ticking time bomb. The Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of U.S. Industrial Alcohol, initially tried to blame anarchists. In the political climate of the day, fear of sabotage was rampant. But the evidence told a very different story, one of corporate negligence. A class action lawsuit followed, and it became one of the first major lawsuits of its kind in the United States. The court case lasted 5 years and featured over 1,000 exhibits and the testimonies of 3,000 witnesses. Ultimately, U.S. Industrial Alcohol was found liable and ordered to pay $628,000 in damages, roughly $10 million today. Families of victims received around $7,000 each, a small comfort for those who had lost so much. But the legacy of the Great Molasses Flood wasn't just legal, it was regulatory. The disaster ushered in a new era of building inspections, safety regulations, and engineering accountability in the U.S., laying groundwork for modern standards. The story also became part of local folklore. Bostonians would tell tales of molasses stains and sticky memories passed down through generations. It was a tragedy, yes, but one wrapped in a surreal, almost comical shell. The Great Molasses Flood has appeared in countless books, documentaries, and even children's stories. It's often listed among the strangest disasters in history, a bizarre reminder of how even the most innocent-seeming materials can become deadly. For decades after, residents swore the North End still smelled like molasses on hot summer days. Whether myth or reality, it added to the eerie legacy of the event. anchoring it permanently into Boston's identity. In 2015, a small plaque was placed at the site of the disaster, near what is now Langone Park. It reads, "On January 15, 1919, molasses tank burst, sending a wave of molasses through the streets of Boston, killing 21 people." The location itself has changed dramatically. The working-class, immigrant-heavy neighborhood is now filled with upscale restaurants, tourist attractions, and waterfront parks, but the ground beneath still holds that sticky past. Modern engineers still study the Great Molasses Flood to understand how pressure, temperature, and material stress can combine in catastrophic ways. The event has become a case study in mechanical failure and risk management. What's perhaps most fascinating is how such a sweet substance turned so sinister. Molasses, a byproduct of sugar production, had long been associated with comfort food and tradition. After 1919, it became a symbol of oversight gone wrong. Eyewitness accounts from that day still read like the stuff of nightmares. Some survivors described being unable to breathe, trapped in what felt like a net. Others told of hearing screams buried beneath the gurgle of syrup. One dogged reporter, Edwin Grosier of the Boston Post, helped bring the scale of the disaster into public focus, documenting the horror and helping pressure authorities to investigate the cause thoroughly. Boston and the nation learned a hard lesson that day. Safety standards aren't red tape, they're lifelines. And even in a world far removed from 1919, the molasses flood continues to drip its lessons down to us. It's easy to laugh at the absurdity of it. A molasses tsunami in downtown Boston? For the families who lost loved ones, it was anything but funny. Tragedy wears many faces, and sometimes it's sticky and slow. So the next time you pour molasses over your pancakes, remember that sweet syrup once unleashed. One of the most unusual disasters in American history. Great Molasses Flood was more than strange, it was deadly, and it changed a city forever.